All right. It's about that time, so I guess we'll get started. I'll start by saying that you're not going to have the benefit of a PowerPoint presentation on screen because I'm too high-tech for my own good. I have iPads and iPhones and MacBook Airs, and none of them will connect to this VGA cable. So when all is said and done, if you really want the PowerPoint presentation, you can email me. I'll send it to you. I promise you it is not a masterpiece of PowerPoint skill or anything. It's just, it's a pretty simple presentation. So let me start off. My name's Tony Bradley. I am a tech writer for PC World. I write the network column focused on business and business and technology. But my background is security. I was formerly a security consultant with EDS and with BT. I've been a CISSP for 11 years now. And I'm a Microsoft MVP in Windows security for 7 years. So that's a little bit of background on me. So since we don't have a slide for you to look at, just so you know what you're in here for, we're going to talk about what you should know about Windows 8 security. So basically, I'm going to talk about some of the new features in Windows 8 as opposed to Windows 7 when it comes to security. We're going to talk about UEFI and secure boot, anti-malware, some of the changes with anti-malware with Windows 8, the changes with Windows Defender, smart screen, dynamic access control, a bunch of different things. Toward the end, after I'm done talking about just the features of Windows 8 itself, we're going to talk a little bit about whether or not those features make a compelling case for telling a customer that they should switch to Windows 8. And if so, which version of Windows 8 makes sense for your customer. So let's start off. First of all, how many of you, if any of you, were at the Windows 8 panel session this morning? Pretty much all of you. So some of this is going to be a recap. We talked this morning a little bit about, I gave a quick overview primer on UEFI. UEFI is basically the new BIOS. In newer hardware, there's still a BIOS because you have to have something to start the motherboard up and start the UEFI. But the UEFI sits in there as a layer so that instead of hitting Control-Alt-Delete and getting the BIOS screen, there's the UEFI screen, which is more of a graphic interface. It lets you get a lot more done. UEFI has access to a wider range of hardware. So from BIOS, you could pretty much only see your drives and your RAM, and that was more or less it. UEFI lets you see your drives, your RAM, your wireless network adapter, your USB ports, and so you have a lot more control over the hardware and what's going on in the system from UEFI. UEFI also initializes the hardware faster, so it's part of creating a more instant on experience. Everyone complains about how long it takes Windows to boot. So any time you can cut off out of that with a faster hardware initialization process is helpful. UEFI can also address drives up to 9.4 zettabytes, which, based on current estimates, is about 3 times as much information as is on the entire internet. So that should keep us in hard drives for a while. But then there's the part that matters to what we're talking about today, and that's the better security. One of the aspects of UEFI, and again, UEFI is not a Microsoft thing, it's not a Windows 8 thing, it's a hardware architecture thing. But one of the aspects of it is secure boot. So UEFI checks to see if the software that's being executed has a valid signature, has a valid certificate. If it doesn't, it can't run. And Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012 are the first operating systems to actually utilize that. Other operating systems could, but they're just not doing it. What that gives you from a security perspective is malware that in current hardware might be able to work itself in at the BIOS level, work itself in at the boot level, work itself in at the kernel level, is not going to be able to do that because it doesn't have a valid signature. So the Secure Boot, Microsoft's implementation of Secure Boot has created some controversy. There are people out there who are upset. And again, not because they think that Microsoft itself is going to prevent like Linux or third-party software from running, but that Microsoft exerts so much control over the OEMs that the OEMs are really only going to validate and certify Windows 8 to run on that hardware. So it's really up to the OEMs if you want to install or if you want to run Linux, it's up to the hardware manufacturer to include the certificate that you would need for Linux to execute on that UEFI. That brings us to the anti-malware. Anti-malware as an industry, or one of the industries that was upset with the concept of Secure Boot and feeling like it cut them out of the loop. The anti-malware software wants to execute as early on in the process as possible, again, to try to catch those rootkits and kernel level threats. And with UEFI and Secure Boot, the anti-malware can't get in there where it wanted to. But Microsoft has a program for early load anti-malware where they're certifying anti-malware partners, certifying that software so that it does have the proper signature, the proper certification to be able to load as a part of that boot process so that it gets in there. So from an anti-malware perspective, it would mean if you're going to run Windows 8, you're going to have to make sure you have basically a Windows 8 certified anti-malware for it to be able to execute under a secure boot scenario. So one of the other things that is in Windows 8 that we had talked about at the panel session this morning is that Windows Defender has changed. So Windows Defender has been there in previous versions of Windows, but it's always been an anti-spyware tool and strictly dedicated to anti-spyware. Microsoft created a broader anti-malware tool, made it available for free, Security Essentials, but you had to download it separately and you make a conscious decision to download it, install it, and run it. With Windows 8, they just merged that into Windows Defender. So now Windows Defender by default is a broader, more comprehensive anti-malware protection, which will be enabled by default. The caveat being Dell, HP, Lenovo, whoever, have Microsoft's permission to disable it as long as they're putting in some other third-party equivalent. So a PC that you buy from Best Buy is most likely not going to have Windows Defender enabled by default because it's going to have a 90-day trial of Symantec instead. But the Windows Defender will still be there. You can still make a decision to turn it on. And again, you're getting not just the anti-spyware part, but broader anti-malware protection. And show of hands, how many people have used or use Security Essentials? And did you continue using it? Okay, because I use a lot of different antivirus, anti-malware products. I'm testing new ones all the time, but Security Essentials, I thought is a really solid. It does the trick. It's small. It's unobtrusive. So I've always been a fan of Security Essentials, and I think it's nice that they've rolled it into Windows Defender and made it kind of an all-in-one approach. How many of you are familiar with the smart screen protection in Internet Explorer? Okay. In Internet Explorer 9, I don't remember if it was an 8 or not. I think it was an 8. Internet Explorer 8, 9 has this smart screen security feature. It uses a combination of application reputation, website reputation, and just monitoring for malicious behavior to identify sites that seem shady or malicious and alert you and prevent you from visiting them, downloading stuff. I don't have the exact number, but I know Microsoft says all the time that Smart Screen has prevented millions of infections, and they've done their studies. The problem with Smart Screen, or not the problem, but the limitation of Smart Screen is that it only works within Internet Explorer 8 or 9 or 10. With Windows 8, they're extending Smart Screen to basically the whole operating system. So that same malicious behavior scanning and application reputation and website reputation, all of that same protection is being applied to basically any incoming traffic. Now, the real upside to that is Internet Explorer, as popular as it is, has fallen to right around the 50% mark in terms of market share. And Firefox and Chrome make up the lion's share of the remaining 50%. With Smart Screen in Windows 7, if you're using Firefox or Chrome, you're not getting that protection. But in Windows 8, you're going to get that Smart Screen protection no matter which browser you're using, or even if you're just downloading stuff on the network that's not even within a browser. So that's a plus for the Windows 8 side. And that's also in Windows Server 2012 too. So moving on to dynamic access control. With Windows 7, Windows Server 2008, dynamic access control gives your IT admins the ability to say what you can or can't do, and limit access to Active Directory objects based on users and groups, basically. With Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012, Microsoft has expanded that to basically any object, so or any attribute. So instead of me just saying John can't use an iPad, or John can use an iPad, I can narrow that down and say John can use the company-issued, company-approved iPad I gave him, but John can't use his own personal iPad. And it gives, so it gives the IT admin a lot more granular control over that access. Instead of just being able to limit on users and groups, I can basically limit on any Active Directory attribute out there. Yes?
So can you lock down, so similarly to saying, hey, it's a single device, yes, on your network, can you similarly lock down whatever the new title is, the modern Metro tile interface to say, hey, you can't get but 3 of your standard work programs. So say, hey, you can go to the desktop, you can go to your QuickBooks or accounting software, and you can go to, so similar to like locking down.
I believe so to an extent. One of the things, okay, so with Windows 8, Microsoft has made this push that you're supposed to use your Microsoft account. Now you can still have a local account, you can still have a domain account, from Windows 8 Pro or Enterprise. But what they want you to do is use the Microsoft account that ties it in with SkyDrive and everything else. In an enterprise, or in a domain-connected Windows 8, that is not that's not enabled by default. When you log in with a domain, you don't have those things aren't connected the way they would be if you logged in with a Windows 8 with a Microsoft account. The IT admin does have the ability to control whether or not you can add that after the fact, because you can go in if you've logged in as a domain under a domain, you can link the Microsoft account so that even if you're logged into the domain, you still have access to SkyDrive games, whatever, all the personal stuff. But it's up to the IT admin, and I know that can be locked down and turned off, and that actually would disable a fair number of the default apps on that Metro modern UI. I mean, if you start taking out all the stuff that's linked in with the Microsoft account, you're not left with much.
Right. I was just in your earlier session, I was thinking about productivity and the security side of it, and saying, well, you are actually allowing a worker to sit at their desk and say, hey, the first 10 minutes I'm going to use my email, and the second 3 hours I'm going to go out and do social networking or look at music or
Right.
travel sites, because that's all built into that modern UI thing. That's where I was saying, well, can we lock it down almost like what you do with a kiosk and say, hey, all you're able to do, I mean, there's no control panel. Hey, you don't get to see that, you don't need to see it.
The short answer is I don't know for sure. I believe so. I think there is Active Directory is pretty powerful. So I mean, if you're working from Active Directory and group policy, you should be able to do pretty much anything you want to.
In line with what you just said, group policy can do it, whether they've got the extensions for Windows 8. I would assume they have it well, Server 12.
Okay. So, all right. So that was dynamic access control. The next thing I want to talk about really isn't, in and of itself, is not a security feature, but having done incident response and having been an IT admin and help desk and tech support and everything else in a former life, I think that the refresh and reset features in Windows 8 are security tools to an extent. How many of you have ever reformatted and rebuilt a machine as a troubleshooting technique? Okay. Not only have I was a staunch advocate for it, only because I knew exactly how long it would take me to do that. And I knew what the final result would be. And I would look at the situation, and if it seemed, I mean, I'd love to sit there and troubleshoot all day. I think it's fun, it's challenging. I'd love to troubleshoot the problem and find the solution and fix it. But I would look at it and say, well, I can spend the next 6 hours sitting here trying to find the solution and fix it, and possibly failing, or in 2 hours I could have this whole thing back up and running. And I've also been a frequent proponent of system restore, especially on the consumer side, as an anti-malware fix. I'm like, you think you got infected? Great, go to system restore, go back to yesterday, boom, you're all set. Infection's gone. Refresh and reset just make that much simpler. So that instead of having to actually reformat and go find the Windows install and start from scratch, refresh basically returns it to a completely clean state, but keeps the user files and settings intact. And reset actually takes it back to out of the box. So you're accomplishing the same goal. You're just skipping a few steps, and so it's simplifying it a little bit. So with one click, you can refresh or you can reset, and then you don't have to do the whole reformat and all that kind of stuff. Again, it's not necessarily an ideal situation or an ideal solution for a security problem, because ideally you'd like to know what the root cause of that security problem was so you could prevent it from happening again. But depending on the scenario, it's certainly the more expedient solution in a lot of situations. Now, I'm going to address one other security feature real quick that isn't actually on my presentation, but I thought it might come up, and that is with Windows 8, you can also, instead of just a password, you can use a PIN, and you can use a picture as your authentication. So you can put a photo up there, and Windows 8 has you select 3 gestures. So you might have a picture of a waterfall, and you might swipe a line down the waterfall and draw a circle at the top, or whatever your 3 gestures are. That becomes your password. That becomes your authentication. And then there's also just a 4-digit PIN. I think both of those are neat, but I don't think they're great security features. In either event, you still have to have a password. The password's kind of your fail-safe. So if you screw up your gestures and you forget whether you circled the waterfall or drew an X on it, you still have a password to fall back on. I think it's you should just use the password. Yeah.
That does seem like it would challenge password reset tools and people, and give them a better reason to forget their password forever.
Well, and one of my concerns actually is, so Microsoft makes you have a password anyway. So if I, in organizations with decent security, that password's going to be something complex, something they haven't used in however many months or years or whatever. It's going to have special characters and capitalization and all these things. And when you're using that password every day or a few times a day, it's easy to remember it. But if you let your users use this picture swiping thing, and then they mess up the picture swiping thing, and you say, oh, well, that's fine, just use your password. And they're like, well, I have no idea what that password is anymore. I haven't used that password in 3 months. So that password as a fail-safe sort of loses its effectiveness, and like you say, you end up having to do password resets anyway. So that is that wraps up the Windows 8 security features part that I was going to talk about. And brings us to the part about whether or not any of those things is actually a strong enough case to convince someone to switch to Windows 8. Or, more importantly, not should you switch to Windows 8, but would you go out to a customer and say, this is why you should switch to Windows 8? Most of you seem to have been at the session this morning, so you know that my feeling on that is basically no. I mean, I would give it a maybe. I think there are scenarios, but like I said this morning, a company that's still on Windows 2000, still on Windows XP, still on Windows Vista, and has been waiting. Companies that had Windows are still on Windows XP, waited through Vista, decided to hold out through Windows 7. I think it's probably about time they upgrade to something, and I don't think there's a compelling reason not to upgrade to Windows 8. Per se. So those businesses, I'd really kind of handle on a case-by-case basis. I mean, Windows 8 does have downgrade rights to Windows 7, so even if I wanted the customer to use Windows 7, I'd probably have them buy Windows 8 and back down to Windows 7. Coming from XP. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Windows 7, so I could never really understand people who didn't move from XP to Windows 7. I got used to jump lists. I got used to arrow snapping my screen from side to side. I got used to being able to, the integration of Internet Explorer 9 with Windows 7 and being able to drag things down to the taskbar. There's a lot of things that I got accustomed to that when I go back and use a Windows XP system now, I feel like I've handicapped myself, and there are things I can't do, and it takes me longer to get things done. So I do think there's a solid business case for moving from XP to 7 or 8. And if an organization, if a customer is ready to refresh, then like I said, I would go ahead and buy Windows 8 and either just use the Windows 8 or back down to Windows 7 if you really feel compelled. There are a couple things that you do get with Windows 8 that you don't get with Windows 7. one of those being storage spaces. So with Windows 8, you can basically, there were ways to do similar stuff with Windows 7, but with Windows 8, you can just add, if you run out of space, you can just add a drive. You can add a USB drive or whatever and just attach it to the same drive letter. And so you can basically have unlimited storage space just by continuing to add just add more space on. So that's hasn't come up for me recently. When you have 1 and 2 and 3 terabyte drives or whatever, you don't run out of space quite as much as you used to. But it still does come up. And actually, it's going to come up more with Ultrabooks because a lot of the Ultrabooks have SSD drives. The SSD drives are much smaller capacity, so I
Squeeze a second drive in the Ultra.
well, depending on the Ultrabook, you might be able to, but my old laptop, I had a 750 gig drive, and then I got an Ultrabook with 128 gig SSD. So, I am actually running into some storage issues now that I didn't used to run into. Like I said, for businesses that are already on Windows 7, though, I don't think any of those security features is a strong selling case for moving to Windows 8 yet. At this morning's session, Onura made the point, after I said that I didn't think companies should upgrade to Windows 8, he had made the point of, well, yeah, but if they're at their refresh cycle, so like I just said, you could buy the Windows 8 and go back to Windows 7. Part of the reason I didn't bother introducing that point is I don't think there are any organizations that have made the move to Windows 7 that are at their refresh cycle yet. That'd be a very short refresh cycle. I mean, the companies that I'm used to dealing with have 3-4 year refresh cycles on an operating system. So any company that has made the switch to Windows 7 in the last year or two probably isn't even thinking about Windows 8.
But those XP customers.
The XP customers that's a whole different story. But I'm just talking about he had made the point about Windows about Windows 7. So yeah, I don't think there are really any Windows 7. There are very few, if any, Windows 7 customers seriously considering Windows 8. And if they are seriously considering Windows 8, or if you fast forward a year and they're considering Windows 8, I'd still, based on what I know now, say I'm not sure that's a strong argument. Like unless there's something in Windows 8 you really need, I think Windows 7 is a very strong, stable operating system.
Can I offer a couple of things that I've seen in Windows 8 that might be?
Absolutely.
So I don't think that, personally, I'm not a big fan of BYOD anyway. I think it's a terrible idea to take all the liability and none of the control. But I don't think any of my clients, I would tell them that they are allowed to let anybody bring their own device that's not Windows 8. And the reason for that is you've got the corporate access page on Windows 8 that you can control what apps those devices have access to, deploy apps to those Windows 8 devices. They open up that one page and it has all their business apps on it. They can just click on that app and download it and install it and run it. So those types of things are great for BYOD. Like I said, I wouldn't even let anybody bring anything other than that. You've also got all the security over what things you allow people to see on their home screen, which a lot of that stuff is going to be integrated into group policy. If it's not, people like Beyond Trust have products that are coming out that will be able to manage home screens and those types of things that will make a huge difference. And Windows 8, most of the things that we are going to be doing within Windows 8 haven't been released yet. When you think about where Windows 7 was in this product cycle, or this point in the product cycle, how many Windows 7 computers had been introduced months before Windows 7 came out? 0. So we already have 20, 30, possibly more than that out there that have been announced, introduced with new hardware, new capabilities, things like that are really going to change the mobile workforce
Well, and if I had to pick one thing and say, well, okay, this is the thing I think would be the selling point, it would be the UEFI and the secure boot, which requires not only Windows 8 though, it requires that you have some newer hardware that actually has UEFI. So, if you're trying to take Windows 8 and put it on your Windows XP machine, you're not going to really get that benefit. But actually, the points you brought up segue nicely to the next slide, which is a very nice, pretty, colorful chart, just comparing the options. And so it comes down to, if you were going to recommend Windows 8 for a customer, which version would you recommend? So when it comes to things like Secure Boot, the refresh reset feature, the Windows Defender, Smart Screen, those are in all of the options, all three flavors of Windows 8. I'm not counting Windows 8 RT in this discussion, but Windows 8, Windows 8 Pro, Windows 8 Enterprise all have those things. If you want or need the BitLocker encryption, you have to have Windows 8 Pro or Windows 8 Enterprise. If you want or need the ability to join a domain, if you want or need the ability to use group policy, you have to have Windows 8 Pro or Windows 8 Enterprise. Then there's a few things, though. If you want the Windows to go, you have to have Windows 8 Enterprise. You can't even use Windows 8 Pro. And to your point about BYOD, as was discussed at length this morning, for an organization that has Windows 8 Enterprise, the Windows to go it can be a great tool for BYOD, because at that point, you don't really have to care what they bring in. You can hand them their Windows 8 operating system on a USB key, and they can bring in any laptop they want, as long as it can run that USB key. So there is an argument to be made there. And then some of the other things that we talked about this morning, like direct access, branch cache, app locker. There's a lot of neat stuff that you get with Windows 8 Enterprise that doesn't come in Windows 8 Pro, which they've taken Ultimate off the table. But again, that's why I always, with Windows 7 and Vista and XP, as far back as I can remember, I've always just said, well, take the one that has all the features in it, and don't even mess with the consumer or the home or the whatever version. So that is basically the presentation. But do we have any questions? Any more questions?
I haven't touched Windows 8, but the refresh that you're talking about, the refresh and the reset, what's the time frame? Is it similar to a restore point, but it's completely back to out of box, or?
It's been a while since I did it. I did it when the beta first came out. I want to say it's longer than System Restore, but shorter than a reformat and reinstall. I don't think it's quite as fast as System Restore, but it'll still save some time.
Does that come off of the recovery partition, or where is it getting the file share and throw the CD in?
You don't throw the CD in. I think it's on a hidden partition.
It's just a click within,
Well, it's just a click, but where's it?
Where is it pulling the files from to do the rewrite?
see, and I don't know, because there's a lot of malware that will create a hidden boot partition, within the drive, which System Restore doesn't affect. So in that instance, a lot of the more complex malware, I'd like to see how the refresh and restart is going to pull that.
I would say I don't, and if you want to give me your email address, I'll research this and find an answer for you. But I would say it's not that it needs the installed disk, because it doesn't have to put all the files there per se. I guess it would if you want it to be clean. Because I was thinking, well, if you just remove all the stuff, and then what you got left, but no, because that wouldn't work. Then you wouldn't have a clean install. So yeah, I'll look into that. All right. If there are no other questions, thank you for coming.